So Almodovar's latest, which is a kind of semi-autobiographical, maybe quasi-autobiographical tale of a filmmaker in stasis played by Antonio Banderas, who won Best Actor at Cannes. He's racked with pain, both physical and mental. He's had a back operation. We meet him first in a swimming pool, clearly sort of, having to stretch his back out. He made a film 3 decades ago, and he hasn't spoken to the lead actor since the day the film opened, when they fell out with each other. They had a famously fractious relationship. Now there is a revival. And I wrote this down at the time. There's a festival putting on and it's in inverted commas, they've gone back and they revived it with a negative restoration. You restore the negative, although actually in the English translation, that phrase negative restoration seemed to mean something. And the festival wants the director and the actor to reunite to introduce the film. So this director, who's basically stopped making films, then has to meet up with somebody who he hasn't spoken to for a long time. And Alberto then discovers that the director has some writing that he's done. He's written a piece called Addiction, which he says, I want to do this. I want to do this as a monologue. And Salvador says, well, it's a confessional piece. Okay, you can take it as a monologue, but you must take my name off it because I don't want to be identified because it's confessional. So the film then basically goes forward and backward simultaneously. We see Salvador looking back to his childhood. We first meet him in a swimming pool and his thoughts float back to his mother, initially played by Penelope Cruz, washing clothes in a river, and he remembers her and her friends singing whilst they wash clothes. He remembers the cinema, seeing films projected on a whitewashed wall, and he particularly remembers images of water. And there's a big thing about water, memory, cinema being tied together, and also something strangely enough, although they're such different filmmakers, there's a lot of Terence Davis crossover in this. The kind of the way in which that childhood is remembered through the company of women who define the world for you, the presence of cinema as a transform, that kind of everything seen through this glorious kind of memorial haze. And then as that story plays out, the present day story sort of crawls forward in terms of him having to deal with his own addictions to medication, him perhaps finding a way to come out of the cocoon, the depressive cocoon in which he has found himself, him remembering his later relationships with his mother. So the thing kind of flows, they're like an ebb and flow all the way through, like a tide. As I said, water is a very big part of this. I thought this was a really, really lovely film for 2 reasons. I mean, firstly, stories about filmmakers in crisis, that is a staple of cinema, whether it's 8.5 or whether it's, Stardust Memories or whatever it is. And that self-reflexivity can be very, very productive. It can also be very just kind of auto-reflexive. But actually, I thought in this case, it was very productive. Banderas is so vulnerable. I've never seen him be this vulnerable before. I'm sure he has been in other films, but this really struck me, that he has this face which is a kind of mask of melancholic regret, and yet his eyes are doing that thing of darting questioningly backwards and forwards wherever he is. So he's got that strange mix of, on the one hand, deadpan, resigned, morose, on the other hand, fearful, and yet there's something else going on in the background. It felt intensely personal, and there's the famous story that when they were reading lines, Almodovar was having to read the lines that were written for his mother and was bursting into tears because it was such a personal. Though it's not autobiographical. I mean, he's played with the history very much. But the other thing I thought was really impressive about it was that although the central character lives amidst great darkness, the film has those blocks of colour that is, kind of Almodovar's trademark. So in a way, it emphasises the greyness of the existence in which he is now, and contrasts that with the vibrancy of his memories of, being a young boy, cinema, his mother, their friends, living in a cave. They ended up living in something which is almost literally a cave with whitewashed walls. And so the film, although it's dealing with some, depression and with stasis and malignancy and guilt and all those things, is colourful and vibrant and bright in the way that you want from Almodovar. And I think if you're an Almodovar fan, you kind of know, because in a way, all Almodovar's films are kind of all about my mother. They're all a sort of riff on that. But if you're coming to this for the first time, and there will still be, obviously, there'll be people listening who haven't seen Almodovar's, this is a really good way in because it's a very generous film in terms of it welcomes you into the story and it paints this really vivid palette. I thought it was terrific. It's called Pain and Glory. I thought it was great.